The Arizona Cardinals finished the 2021 regular season with an 11-6 record and lost in the wild card round of the postseason. They started out the year 7-0 and through 12 games were 10-2. Quarterback Kyler Murray has since received a very hefty contract extension, and congratulations to him and his family, by the way. I genuinely mean that. But, and there's always a but, their future scares the absolute you-know-what out of me, and in today's video, we are going to discuss why their future is murky and a bit unclear at the moment, and what we fear most for them in the coming years, and without further ado, let's begin. And when discussing the Arizona Cardinals and the future of this team and franchise, yes, they do have Kyler Murray, and for a long time now, but it starts with head coach Cliff Kingsbury. Cliff at times has looked like one of the best head coaches in the entire NFL, and that's not an exaggeration. However, there is a big concern I have with the Arizona Cardinals, and it's Cliff's ability to coach in the second half of the season. And this statistic here shows how bad Cliff has been in the second half of each and every season he's coached, dating back to his days at Texas Tech, when he had a pretty good quarterback there by the name of Patrick Mahomes. The common denominator is defenses figure out his offensive scheme, and I do not expect it to be much different this year. For the first 6 games, the Cardinals will be without star receiver DeAndre Hopkins, which does not help things, and the receiving core will be led by Marquise Brown, a 34-year-old AJ Green, and second-year player Rondale Moore. And I personally love their tight end room with Zach Ertz and Trey McBride, a rookie from Colorado State, so I did want to acknowledge those guys as well, and especially the future of McBride after playing a year behind and in the shadow of Zach Ertz. I fully expect him to blossom into a great player in 2023 and beyond. Now, to be clear, I like the pairing of former Oklahoma teammates in Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown, and I have been very vocal in the fact I think these guys are going to kill it this year, and especially early on. Combine DeAndre Hopkins being out with how good Cliff Kingsbury has historically been in the first halves of seasons, and it makes a lot of sense for Marquise to pop off, as people say, early in the year. But the NFL is a marathon and not a sprint, and what concerns me is this team eventually falling off, and not even from the Cliff aspect, but from the Kyler and upper management aspect. The contract dispute recently, or the factor within the contract of having him study a couple of hours per week, and then the organization taking it out of the contract, is embarrassing that it went as public as it did. And for them to even have to include it to begin with is a joke. And look, guys, I'll be the first to admit I'm not a big Kyler Murray fan, but to suggest Kyler doesn't watch film, or to suggest he's got this far by half-assing something such as film study, is ridiculous. And I very much am under the belief this will come up again at some point, such as after what we, or at least I presume to be a loss, during the 5-game span of at Minnesota, home against Seattle, at the Rams, then the 49ers and Chargers both at home. There's a chance Arizona goes 1-4 during this stretch, and heading into that late bye is what I fear for this team. When we begin to hear the rumblings of, should we have given Kyler this contract because he can't win big games, and these types of discussions. Now, that's not me saying Kyler can't win big games, as much as it is to say the Cardinals' defense is not the best, and they lost a future Hall of Fame pass rusher in Chandler Jones this offseason, and are going to have to rely on J.J. Watt to lead their pass rush in year 2022. Eventually, DeAndre will come back after a first few game span, where Kyler and Marquise are looking like the 2018 versions of themselves at Oklahoma, when Marquise went for 75 catches for 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. There will probably be some frustration when his targets start to cut back and the team loses a few too many games in a short time period. And the Arizona Cardinals did not trade for Marquise Brown to have him be a one-year rental. They made this trade knowing they will have to pay him a long-term contract and lock him up as well for the next 4 to 5 years. If in the scenario the Cardinals are playing well from an offensive standpoint and they continue to play well, this would be an anomaly given the track record of head coach Cliff Kingsbury. In weeks 1 through 7 of the 2021 regular season, the Cardinals put up a whopping 225 points for an average of 32.1 per game and won 5 games by double digits. They were doing great and all was good, and they were 7-0 as well, by the way. Kyler Murray was an MVP candidate, and at that point in the regular season, they had smoked the future Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams by 17 points with a score of 37-20. And as we know, in the wildcard round of the playoffs, the Rams eventually got the last laugh. But in weeks 14 through 18, in a stretch that started with a home game against the Rams on Monday night, they went 1-4 during the final 5 games of the regular season and put up an average of just 21.2 points per game. And if you're hot on offense and start out the year by averaging 34 points per game because you added a new wrinkle or a new offensive weapon or something along these lines, and it's taking defenses a little while to adjust, and then by season's end you dip to 28 or 29 points, that's fine because you're still in the upper tier of offenses and still kicking ass for the most part. And in fact, defenses have the edge later in the season because they've now seen weeks of offenses tape, and they have more of an idea of what to expect from offenses than they would in the first few weeks because of all of the available tape for them to study throughout the week. And that makes sense, as offenses always are trying to improve, and likewise, not surprisingly, defenses are too. But for there to be an 11-point drop-off is significantly more than you would expect and hope for in a drop-off from the beginning to the end of the season. And the final 5 games for the Arizona Cardinals in 2022 are not exactly kind to them, as they play the Patriots, at Denver, home against the Bucs, then at the Falcons and 49ers. The Falcons game is predictably a win for them, but the others sure aren't easy, and especially against those defenses. And this all culminates into one reason why I fear for the Arizona Cardinals in 2022. Players, obviously, hate losing. They work all year and put their bodies on the line every single week, and hell, as I make this video, every single day in training camp, to eventually be able to call themselves a Super Bowl champion. And by this time in late December and early January is when we will start to hear all of the Cliff Kingsbury stats about how his teams don't perform when it matters most and how the drop-off is underway, and eventually that will trickle into, was Kyler worth the contract, and what about this Hollywood Brown situation and the whole nine? And this is all being said without having addressed the defensive side of the football. The Cardinals gave up the 11th fewest points in the NFL last year, which is solid, and I'm sure they would gladly take this again. This was all with a few key members of the defense getting injured in J.J. Watt, Marco Wilson, and Robert Alford. But they lost Chandler Jones this offseason, and that very much worries me, because who is going to get after the quarterback now? J.J. Watt has played 2 full seasons out of the last 6, and at this point in his career, you're hoping he can play every game, but certainly not expecting. And Cliff is obviously not a defensive-minded head coach, so what further concerns me is the expected offensive slump, combined with the defense that up front is not all that good. The Cardinals' first 3 games of the season are home against the Chiefs, at the Raiders, and home against the Rams, and those are not easy teams for Arizona or for anyone for that matter. And I don't expect them to start out 0-3, but it's also not impossible for them to start out that bad. I was not a big fan of the James Conner contract at $7 million per year either, and I understand he had 15 rushing touchdowns last year, but if you're a Cardinals fan watching this, do you honestly think he's going to repeat the year he had last year? He averaged less than 4 yards per carry on top of it. I worry about this team's outlook with Cliff Kingsbury as their head coach, and I do think if they fail to win a playoff game this year, then Cliff will be fired at season's end. And in what would be the post-Cliff Kingsbury era, the Cardinals front office, you'd have to think, would consult Kyler and ask who he wants to be the next head coach because of how much of a financial commitment they've made to him. It's a slippery slope for the Arizona Cardinals to be in at the moment, there's no denying that, and while they have some very good players on this team, I don't think they have a good enough team to beat the upper echelon teams in the NFC, keyword here, when it matters most. We only have one game to show, as there's only been one playoff game in the Cliff Kingsbury era, and it was a 23-point loss for them, but that is in the past. The Arizona Cardinals are going to be a fun team to watch, as they have playmakers everywhere on offense, and opposing defenses will certainly stress out on choosing who to guard, who to prioritize, and how often per game. I hope it all works out for the Cardinals, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about their future heading into the 2022 NFL season. And with that being said, that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, now is the time I ask you to please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as it would mean the world. The Discord link is in the bio for anyone wanting to join, and with the season quickly approaching, the videos are going to start to ramp up. So again, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.